Hey everyone, I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here I am. I feel like my life has been flipped upside down, and I don't know what to do. I need advice, or maybe I just need to vent. Let me give you some context first. My wife, Melissa, and I have been married for 7 years. I genuinely thought she was my soulmate. We had the kind of relationship people envied, or at least I thought we did. We have a 6-year-old daughter, Emily, who is my entire world. If you asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have told you Melissa was the perfect wife, smart, funny, and a great mom. She had her quirks, sure, but who doesn't? And then there's my best friend, Dave. We've been inseparable since high school. He was the guy who always had my back, the one I could count on no matter what. He's godfather to Emily, and I trusted him like a brother. I guess that was my second mistake. 2 weeks ago, Melissa told me she wanted to throw a small get-together at our place. She said it was just for a few close friends, and I didn't think much of it. Melissa loves hosting parties, and honestly, I've always liked having people over. Dave was, of course, the first person she invited. The night of the party, everything seemed normal. Melissa looked amazing in this red dress I hadn't seen her wear in years. She was glowing, laughing, and acting like the life of the party. I noticed Dave was acting a little different. He kept finding excuses to be near Melissa. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was being paranoid. But by the end of the night, I couldn't ignore it. At one point, I went to grab a drink from the kitchen and found them standing way too close, whispering to each other. When they saw me, Melissa laughed nervously and said, "Oh, we were just talking about old times." Dave chimed in with some joke about me being jealous, and I tried to laugh it off, but something felt off. I let it go that night. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, this was Melissa and Dave, 2 people I trusted with my life. But that was just the beginning. After the party, I couldn't shake the weird vibe I got from Melissa and Dave. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, but something about the way they acted stuck with me. The next morning, while Emily watched cartoons, I brought it up to Melissa. I tried to keep it casual, like I wasn't accusing her of anything. "Hey, you and Dave seemed really buddy-buddy last night," I said, trying to gauge her reaction. She barely looked up from her phone. "What? Don't be ridiculous," she said with a laugh. "He's your best friend. Why would you even think that?" Her answer should have reassured me, but her tone was off. Dismissive. Like I was a fool for even asking. I felt a little embarrassed for bringing it up, so I dropped it. That was my third mistake. For the next few days, I couldn't help but notice how glued to her phone she was. Melissa's always been into social media, but this was different. She'd be laughing at messages and quickly locking her screen when I walked into the room. One night I joked, "Who are you texting, your secret boyfriend?" expecting her to laugh or roll her eyes. Instead, she gave me this annoyed look and said, "Can I have a little privacy, Michael? Not everything I do is your business." That stung. Privacy? Since when did we keep secrets from each other? But I backed off because I didn't want to start a fight, especially in front of Emily. The real red flag came a few days later. Dave texted me, asking if I wanted to grab a drink after work. It wasn't unusual, Dave and I always hung out like that. But this time Melissa seemed weirdly enthusiastic about it. "You should totally go," she said almost too quickly. "You deserve a night out." I remember thinking it was a little strange because Melissa's usually the one who complains when I go out too much. But I shrugged it off. Maybe she was just being nice for once. So I went. When I got home that night, something felt wrong. The house was spotless, which wasn't like Melissa after a day with Emily. The candles on the dining table were burned down, and there were 2 wine glasses in the sink. "Did someone come over?" I asked casually. Melissa didn't miss a beat. "Oh no," she said. "I just had a little wine while watching TV after Emily went to bed." But one of the glasses had lipstick on it, and Melissa wasn't wearing any. My stomach dropped, but I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted to be sure before accusing her of anything. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the wine glasses. I wanted to believe Melissa, but something about her explanation didn't sit right with me. I tried to brush it off for Emily's sake, but the doubts were eating at me. A week later I decided to test the waters. Hey, you wouldn't believe how messy the kitchen was when I got home last night, I said casually while we were having breakfast. Melissa froze for just a second, barely noticeable, before taking a sip of her coffee. Yeah, I guess I didn't clean up as well as I thought, she said with a forced laugh. Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. She was lying. But instead of confronting her, I started paying more attention. I wanted proof before jumping to conclusions. It didn't take long for things to escalate. One Friday night, Melissa said she was going out with her girlfriends. We're doing a spa night and dinner, she said, already dressed in a little black dress that was way too fancy for a casual dinner. I wanted to ask why she was so dressed up, but I held back. I didn't want to seem controlling. Around 10 p.m. I texted her, "How's dinner?" It took her 30 minutes to reply, "Great. Just got to the spa. Don't wait up." Something felt off, so I did something I've never done before. I checked her location on the family tracking app we'd installed for emergencies. My heart sank when I saw she wasn't at a spa. She was at a bar across town. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach. So I called her. She answered on the second ring, and I could hear loud music and laughter in the background. "Hey, is everything okay?" she asked, her voice a little too cheerful. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just wanted to check in. Thought you were at the spa." "Oh, we decided to grab a quick drink before heading there," she said quickly. "Nothing crazy. I'll text you when I'm home." I didn't believe her, but I didn't push it. After we hung up, I stared at the tracker for an hour, watching as her location stayed at the bar. Around midnight, she finally came home. Her makeup was smudged, and she smelled like cologne that wasn't mine. "How was the spa?" I asked, my voice laced with sarcasm. She glared at me. "You're always so suspicious, Michael." "It was fine. I'm going to bed." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Something was definitely going on, and I was going to find out what. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being played for a fool. Melissa acted like everything was normal, cooking breakfast, playing with Emily, and scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened the night before. But I couldn't get the smell of cologne out of my head. That evening, when Melissa went to take a shower, I did something I'd never thought I'd do in my life. I went through her phone. I told myself it was a last resort, but deep down I knew I had crossed a line. Still, I needed answers. At first, everything seemed normal. Texts from her mom, our neighbors, her girlfriends. But then I noticed a string of deleted messages. Melissa's not the tech-savvy type, so she didn't realize that the phone still shows the numbers and timestamps of deleted conversations. One number stood out because it didn't have a name, just a string of messages wiped clean. I copied the number and called it from my own phone. A man's voice answered. "Hello," he said. I froze for a moment. Hey, is this, Dave?" I stammered, pretending I'd dialed the wrong number. There was a pause before he replied, "Who's this?" That voice. I knew that voice. It was Dave. I hung up without answering, my hands trembling. My best friend, the guy I trusted like a brother, was the one Melissa was hiding. It all made sense now. The stolen glances at the party, the secretive texts, the weird vibe. When Melissa came out of the bathroom, I tried to act normal, but I couldn't. I kept replaying the sound of Dave's voice in my head. She must have noticed something because she asked, "Are you okay? You've been quiet." "Just tired," I mumbled, avoiding her eyes. That night I couldn't sleep again. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long it had been going on. Was Emily involved in any of this? Did she see or hear anything she shouldn't have? My mind was racing. The next morning I decided I needed more proof before confronting either of them. I called out of work and hired a private investigator. It felt dramatic, like something out of a bad movie, but I didn't know what else to do. If I was going to blow up my life, I needed to be absolutely sure. For the next few days I pretended everything was fine while the investigator followed Melissa. It killed me inside to act normal, especially when I already knew in my gut that my wife and best friend were betraying me. But the worst was yet to come. The investigator didn't take long. Just 4 days after I hired him, I got a call. "You're going to want to see this in person," he said. My heart sank. I drove to his office, gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Part of me hoped he was wrong, that this was all some huge misunderstanding. But deep down I already knew what I was about to see. He handed me a manila envelope when I arrived. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice calm but heavy. I didn't even wait to sit down. I opened the envelope right there and saw the pictures. Melissa and Dave at a hotel, arms wrapped around each other like they didn't have a care in the world. There was one of them kissing in the parking lot, another of them walking into the lobby hand in hand. But the one that gutted me the most was a shot of them sitting at the hotel bar laughing. She looked so happy. Happier than I'd seen her in years. I didn't know what to do. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. I thanked the investigator and drove home, the envelope sitting on the passenger seat like a time bomb. Every red light felt like an eternity, every minute that passed like another knife in my back. When I got home, Melissa was in the kitchen, making sandwiches for Emily. She looked up at me and smiled, like everything was fine, like she wasn't ripping my life apart behind my back. "Hey, how was work?" she asked. I couldn't answer. My throat felt like it was closing up. I just nodded and walked past her to the bedroom. I locked the door and spread the photos out on the bed. I stared at them, trying to make sense of it all. Why Dave? Why now? Was she bored? Unhappy? Was it something I did or didn't do? The questions were endless and the answers felt out of reach. That night I barely spoke to her. Every time she asked what was wrong, I just said I was tired. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to think. I needed a plan. The next day I called Dave. Calling Dave was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I stared at my phone for what felt like an hour before finally dialing his number. My hands were shaking as it rang. "Hey man." Dave answered, sounding cheerful, too cheerful. "Hey, can we talk?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Sure. Everything okay?" he asked, a hint of concern creeping in. "No, Dave. Everything is not okay," I said bluntly. There was silence on the other end. "I know what's been going on. I know about you and Melissa." For a second I thought he might deny it, try to play dumb. But instead he sighed. "Look, Mike, I can explain." "No, you can't," I snapped, cutting him off. "There's no explanation for sleeping with your best friend's wife." "Okay, but it's not what you think," he said, his voice shaky now. "We didn't plan for this to happen. It just happened." I laughed bitterly. "It just happened? Are you serious? You don't trip and fall into a hotel room, Dave." There was another pause. "I didn't mean to hurt you, man," he said quietly. "But you did," I said, my voice breaking. "You didn't just hurt me, you blew up my entire life. How long has this been going on?" There was a long silence before he finally answered. "A few months," he admitted. "A few months." I repeated, my voice rising. "And all that time you came to my house, ate my food, played with my daughter like nothing was wrong? How could you do that?" "I don't know, okay? I don't know," he said, his voice cracking. "I messed up. I know I messed up." I wanted to scream at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain he'd caused me. But instead I just hung up. There was nothing left to say. When I walked back into the living room, Melissa was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I stood there for a moment just staring at her, wondering how she could betray me like this. "Melissa," I said finally. She looked up, surprised. "We need to talk." She must have seen something in my face because her expression changed. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice cautious. I sat down across from her, keeping my distance. "I know about you and Dave." Her face went pale and for a moment she didn't say anything. Then she tried to play dumb. "What are you talking about?" "Don't," I said sharply. "I have proof. I know you've been sneaking around with him. So don't lie to me." Her mouth opened and closed like she was trying to come up with an excuse. Finally she said, "It's not what you think." I laughed bitterly. "That's exactly what Dave said. Do you two rehearse this stuff?" Tears welled up in her eyes. Michael, I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear. It was a mistake. A mistake. I said, my voice rising. Sleeping with my best friend wasn't a mistake, Melissa. It was a choice. Over and over again, you chose him. She started crying, but I didn't feel sorry for her. Not this time. Melissa sat there, tears streaming down her face, but I wasn't buying it. I'd seen enough. I leaned back, trying to keep calm, but my fists were clenched so tightly my knuckles ached. How long? I asked again, my voice cold and flat. She hesitated, her eyes darting around like she was looking for an escape. It wasn't serious, she said finally. It didn't mean anything. That's not what I asked, I said, staring her down. How long? She swallowed hard, then muttered, 5 months. 5 months. Almost half a year. My heart felt like it stopped. I had spent those 5 months working late to give us a better life, taking Emily to her ballet classes, planning date nights for a marriage I thought was worth saving. And the whole time she was sneaking off with Dave. 5 months. I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. You've been lying to me, to Emily, for 5 months? She broke down sobbing. I didn't want to hurt you, Michael. I swear. I didn't know how to stop. Didn't know how to stop. I snapped. Melissa, you don't accidentally sleep with someone for 5 months. You made that choice every single time. She tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. I love you, she said, her voice cracking. I do. I felt so lonely, Michael. You were always working. You never paid attention to me anymore. I stared at her, dumbfounded. So this is my fault now? Because I was working to give you and Emily a good life? She shook her head quickly. No, that's not what I meant. I made a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was stupid. You're damn right you were stupid, I said, standing up. Do you even realize what you've done? You didn't just betray me. You destroyed our family. How do you think Emily's going to feel when she finds out her mom is a liar and a cheater? Don't bring Emily into this. She shouted, suddenly defensive. Oh, I'm bringing her into this, I shot back. Because she deserves better than this. Better than you. Melissa sobbed harder, but I wasn't done. And Dave? Did it even cross your mind what this would do to me? To our friendship? Or did you just not care? She didn't answer, just buried her face in her hands. I felt a strange mix of rage and heartbreak. I wanted to yell, to throw something, to make her feel as broken as I did. But then I heard the sound of little footsteps behind me. Daddy. Emily's small voice cut through the tension like a knife. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed animal, her big blue eyes filled with confusion. Why is Mommy crying? She asked softly. My heart shattered all over again. It's okay, sweetie, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mommy and Daddy are just having a grown-up talk. Emily looked at Melissa, then back at me. Are you mad at Mommy? I crouched down and hugged her tightly. I'm not mad at you, okay? Everything's going to be fine. I promise. But deep down, I didn't believe that promise. Not for a second. After I got Emily back to her room and tucked her in, I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. I could still hear Melissa crying softly in the living room, but I didn't care. All I could think about was how to protect my daughter from this mess. When I went back, Melissa had pulled herself together, sort of. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, looking up at me with red, puffy eyes. We can fix this, she said quietly. For Emily. We can fix it. I laughed bitterly. Fix it? How, Melissa? By pretending this never happened? By sweeping it under the rug until the next time you feel lonely and decide to ruin someone else's life? It's not like that, she said, shaking her head. I made a mistake, but I love you, Michael. I love our family. Please don't throw everything away because of one stupid mistake. One stupid mistake. I repeated, my voice rising. You've been sneaking around for 5 months, Melissa. That's not a mistake. That's a choice you made over and over again. She started crying again, but I wasn't in the mood for her tears. You know what really kills me? I said. You didn't even think to stop until you got caught. If I hadn't found out, how much longer were you planning to keep this going? Another 5 months? Another year? Melissa looked down, unable to meet my eyes. I don't know, she whispered. That's what I thought, I said, shaking my head. You didn't stop because you felt guilty. You stopped because you ran out of places to hide. For the next hour we argued in circles. Melissa begged me to forgive her, to go to therapy, to work through this. She kept saying how much she loved me, how much she wanted to save our family. But the more she talked, the more it sounded like she just didn't want to deal with the consequences of her actions. Finally, I'd had enough. I'm done, I said, cutting her off mid-sentence. Her head snapped up. What do you mean, done? I mean I can't do this anymore, I said. I can't look at you without seeing what you've done. I can't sleep in the same bed as you knowing you shared it with him. And I can't pretend everything's okay when it's not. You're just going to throw away 7 years of marriage? She asked, her voice breaking. No, Melissa, I said. You already did. I walked out before she could respond, grabbing my jacket and my car keys. I needed air. Space. Anything to clear my head. I drove around aimlessly for hours, replaying everything in my mind. The lies, the pictures, the look on Emily's face when she asked if I was mad at her mom. By the time I got back, it was nearly midnight. Melissa was asleep on the couch, clutching her phone like a lifeline. I couldn't even look at her. I grabbed a blanket, threw it over her, and went to the guest room. I needed time to figure out my next move. But even as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I knew there was no going back. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Emily laughing in the kitchen. For a brief second, I forgot about everything that had happened. Then reality came crashing back. I got dressed and went downstairs, bracing myself for whatever came next. Melissa was at the stove, making pancakes like it was just another Saturday. Emily was at the table, covered in syrup, giggling about something Melissa had said. For a moment I stood there watching them, wondering how Melissa could act so normal. Like she hadn't just destroyed our family. Morning, Daddy, Emily said, waving at me with sticky fingers. Morning, sweetheart, I said, forcing a smile as I kissed her on the head. Melissa turned around, holding a plate of pancakes. I made breakfast, she said softly, her voice almost hopeful. I ignored her and grabbed a cup of coffee. I couldn't sit at the table with her, pretending everything was fine. Instead, I took my coffee to the living room and tried to think. After breakfast, Melissa came in and sat on the edge of the couch. We need to talk, she said, her voice quiet. We talked last night, I said without looking at her. Michael, please, she said, her voice cracking. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just tell me what to do. I set my coffee down and finally looked at her. I want the truth, I said. All of it. No more lies, no more excuses. I deserve to know everything. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the kitchen where Emily was playing. Not here, she whispered. Fine, I said. Emily, sweetie, can you watch some cartoons in your room for a little bit? Okay, Daddy, she said, running upstairs with her tablet. When we were alone, Melissa took a deep breath. It started 5 months ago, she began. Dave and I were texting about your birthday party. He asked if I needed help planning it and… I don't know, we just started talking more. It felt nice. Like someone was paying attention to me. And that led to sleeping with him? I asked coldly. She flinched. No, not at first. We just talked. It wasn't physical until… I don't know, a month later. A month later? I repeated, my anger bubbling up again. So you had 4 weeks to stop yourself and you didn't? She looked down at her hands. I wasn't thinking clearly. I know it was wrong, but I felt so disconnected from you. You were always working and I felt invisible. I stood up, pacing the room. So this is my fault? Because I was working to keep a roof over your head and food on the table? No, she said quickly. It's not your fault. It's mine. I let it happen. I'm just trying to explain. I don't want your explanations, I snapped. I want to know how many times you lied to me. How many times you left this house and went to him. How many times you looked me in the eye and pretended everything was fine. Melissa started crying again, but I didn't care. I don't know how many times, she whispered. A lot. A lot, I repeated, laughing bitterly. Well, at least you're honest about that. I ended it, she said, her voice desperate. Before you found out. I told Dave it was over. Yeah, because you knew I was onto you, I said. If I hadn't found out, you'd still be sneaking around, wouldn't you? She didn't answer, and that silence said more than words ever could. Melissa's silence hung in the air like a bomb waiting to go off. She wasn't denying it, and that hurt more than anything she'd said so far. I sat back down, burying my face in my hands, trying to collect myself. I needed to stay calm for Emily's sake, if nothing else. You've been lying to me for 5 months, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. Do you even understand what you've done? To me? To us? I know I messed up, she said, her voice trembling. But I love you, Michael. I love our family. I want to fix this. Fix this. I repeated, laughing bitterly. You can't fix this, Melissa. You didn't just cheat, you betrayed me with my best friend. The one person I trusted most after you. How do you come back from that? She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I'll do anything, she said, tears streaming down her face. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just please don't give up on us. Us. I said, shaking my head. There is no us anymore, Melissa. Not after this. She started sobbing harder, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I felt empty, like all the love and trust I'd built over the years had been ripped out of me and stomped on. At that moment, Emily came running back downstairs, clutching her stuffed animal. Why's Mommy crying again? She asked, looking between us with wide, confused eyes. Melissa wiped her face quickly and forced a smile. It's nothing, sweetie. Mommy's just a little sad. Emily turned to me. Did you make Mommy sad, Daddy? Her question hit me like a freight train. I knelt down and pulled her into a hug. No, baby, I said softly. Sometimes grown-ups just get sad. It's not your fault, okay? She nodded, but I could tell she didn't really understand. How could she? She was just a kid, caught in the middle of something she didn't deserve. After Emily went back to her room, I stood up and faced Melissa. This is going to end one of 2 ways, I said firmly. You can move out, or I will. Her eyes widened in panic. Michael, no. Please don't do this. Don't break up our family. You already broke it, I said flatly. Now it's about picking up the pieces. She started to say something, but I cut her off. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, I said. Tomorrow I'll figure out what comes next. Without waiting for her response, I walked out. As I lay in the guest bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The life I thought I had was gone. It was time to start figuring out how to rebuild, without Melissa. The next morning I woke up early. For the first time in weeks I felt like I had a plan, or at least the beginning of one. I couldn't live in limbo anymore, pretending things were okay for Emily's sake. Melissa had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. When I walked into the kitchen, Melissa was already there, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. Her eyes were red and puffy, and her hands shook as she gripped the mug. For a split second I felt a pang of sympathy. Then I remembered why we were here. We need to talk, I said, keeping my tone calm but firm. She nodded, setting the mug down. I'll do whatever you want, Michael, she said quietly. Just tell me what to do. I want a divorce, I said, the words coming out steadier than I expected. Her face crumpled. No, she said, shaking her head. No, please. Don't do this. Don't break up our family. Our family. I repeated. You weren't thinking about our family when you were sneaking around with Dave. You made this choice, Melissa, not me. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to plead with me. I'll change, she said. I'll prove to you that I'm committed to us. Just give me a chance. I gave you chances, I said. Every time you came home late and lied to my face, I gave you a chance. Every time I trusted you, I gave you a chance. And you threw them all away." She was sobbing now, but I forced myself to stay composed. "I'll move out," I said. "You can stay here with Emily until we figure out custody arrangements. I won't take her away from you, but I can't live like this anymore." "You can't leave," she said desperately. "Emily needs you. She needs stability," I said. "And she's not going to get that if I stay here pretending I'm okay." "I'm not okay, Melissa." For a moment, she just stared at me like she couldn't believe what was happening. Then she stood up, her expression shifting from desperation to anger. "So that's it?" she said, her voice shaking. "You're just going to walk away? Throw away everything we built together?" "I'm not the one who threw it away," I said. "You did." I walked out of the kitchen before the conversation could go any further. I spent the rest of the day packing a bag and making arrangements to stay with a friend. I told Emily I was going on a work trip for a little while, which seemed to satisfy her. She hugged me tightly, and it took everything I had not to break down right there. By the time I left, Melissa was a wreck. She begged me one last time not to go, but I didn't even look at her as I walked out the door. I knew if I did, I might not be able to leave. The first night away from home was strange. I stayed with my friend Eric, who didn't ask a lot of questions, which I appreciated. I wasn't ready to tell him the whole story yet. Instead, I sat on his couch with a beer in hand, staring at the TV without really watching it. My mind was stuck on Emily, how she'd taken my leaving so calmly, like she didn't understand it was more than just a work trip. The next day, I finally called my lawyer. I didn't even know where to start, so I just spilled everything. The affair, the betrayal, the pictures, the years of lies. He listened without interrupting, and then walked me through what to expect if I filed for divorce. Hearing the process laid out in black and white terms made it feel real, but it also made my stomach churn. This was happening. My marriage was over. Later that afternoon, Melissa started blowing up my phone. At first she sent long, emotional texts, "Please come home. I'll do anything to make this right. We need you. Emily needs you." When I didn't respond, the tone shifted. "You're being cruel, Michael. You're overreacting. Everyone makes mistakes. If you really loved me, you'd give me another chance." I ignored all of it. I didn't trust myself to respond without saying something I'd regret. But then, late that night, she sent a message that froze me in my tracks. "You're going to ruin Emily's life if you do this." I couldn't stay silent anymore. I called her immediately. She answered on the first ring. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I snapped. "How dare you guilt-trip me using Emily?" "I'm not trying to guilt-trip you," she said, her voice defensive. "I'm just being honest. She needs both of us, Michael. She needs her parents together." "Her parents aren't together, Melissa," I said. "You made sure of that?" "She doesn't have to know," she said quickly. "We can keep this between us. She's still so young. She doesn't need to know what happened." I laughed bitterly. "You think that's better? To lie to her? What happens when she's old enough to realize her parents are miserable?" Melissa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "You keep saying that," I said. "But you meant it every time you lied to me, every time you went to see him. You knew what you were doing, Melissa. What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I'm trying, Michael. I'm trying to fix this." "I don't want anything from you," I said coldly. "This isn't about you anymore. It's about Emily. I'll do whatever it takes to protect her from this mess." "You're not the only one who loves her," she said, her voice rising. "I'm her mother." "Then start acting like it," I snapped before hanging up. That night, I lay awake in Eric's guest room, staring at the ceiling and wondering how everything had fallen apart so quickly. I felt like I was on a runaway train, and there was no way to stop it. The next day, Melissa started trying a new angle: denial. She texted me saying things like, "You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just a few bad decisions. You're making it seem worse than it is. I told you it's over with Dave. Doesn't that mean anything?" It felt like she was rewriting history, trying to convince me that 5 months of betrayal was just a blip on the radar. I didn't respond. What was the point? There was no justification for what she'd done. Later that evening I got a call from Dave. I stared at my phone, debating whether to answer. Against my better judgment I picked up. "What do you want?" I said, my voice cold. "Look man, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from," Dave began. "But I need to explain." "Explain what?" I snapped. "How you slept with my wife and destroyed my family." "Because I don't think there's much left to explain." "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," he said. "I didn't mean to." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't you dare say you didn't mean to. You knew exactly what you were doing, Dave. You were my best friend. I trusted you." "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "I messed up, okay? I hate myself for it." "Good," I said flatly. "You should." There was silence for a moment, then he said, "I just wanted you to know that it's over. Melissa and I aren't talking anymore. I told her we can't keep doing this." I laughed bitterly. "How noble of you. After 5 months, you finally decided to grow a conscience." "Michael, I'm sorry," he said, "but I didn't want to hear it." "You're sorry," I said, my voice rising. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Dave. Sorry doesn't undo the fact that you betrayed me in the worst way possible." "I know," he said quietly. I wanted to apologize. That's all." "Save it," I said. "We're done, Dave. Don't call me again." I hung up before he could say anything else. My hands were shaking and my heart was pounding. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut all over again. As if that wasn't enough, Melissa called me later that night. I almost didn't answer, but I figured I might as well hear what excuse she had this time. "Michael," she began, her voice soft and pleading. "I talked to Dave today. He told me he called you." "Yeah, he did," I said flatly. "What's your point?" "He's trying to fix things," she said. "He feels terrible about what happened." "Good for him," I said. "But that doesn't change anything." She sighed. "Why are you being so stubborn? We can move past this if you just—" "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "I'm done. Do you hear me, Melissa? I'm done. You and Dave can feel as guilty as you want, but that doesn't change what you did. It's over." "You don't mean that," she said, her voice shaking. "I know you still love me." I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. I had loved her, so much it hurt. But now all I felt was anger and betrayal. "I don't know what I feel anymore," I said finally. "But I know I can't live like this." For once she didn't have a response. The line went silent and then she hung up. A few days later I got a call from Melissa's mom, Susan. I've always had a good relationship with my in-laws, they're kind, reasonable people, but I wasn't sure I could handle this conversation. Still, I answered. "Michael, honey," Susan began, her tone cautious. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing," I said stiffly. I didn't want to be rude, but I wasn't in the mood for small talk. She hesitated. "Melissa told me, well, she told me some things. I just wanted to hear your side." I let out a bitter laugh. "She told you her version of the story, I'm sure. Did she leave out the part where she slept with my best friend for 5 months?" Susan was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed. "I'm so sorry, Michael. I don't even know what to say. It's not the Melissa I know." "Yeah, well, it's the Melissa I've been living with," I said. "And now she's trying to guilt me into staying for Emily's sake." Susan's tone softened. "You're a good father. I know you're doing your best to protect Emily. But, Michael, do you think there's any way to work through this? For her?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the question. "I've thought about it," I admitted. "But how do you rebuild trust when it's been completely destroyed?" Susan didn't have an answer. After a long pause, she said, "I just hope you'll keep Emily's happiness at the center of everything. She's a strong little girl, but this is going to be hard for her." "It already is," I said quietly. "But I'll do whatever it takes to make sure she's okay." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. Susan's words lingered in my mind, but they didn't change how I felt. I couldn't stay in that house, not with everything that had happened. And I couldn't keep pretending things were normal for Emily's sake. It wasn't fair to her. Later that day, I went back to the house while Melissa was out and packed up more of my things. I tried to be quick, but as I was grabbing some photos from the living room, Emily came downstairs. "Daddy, are you leaving again?" she asked, her voice small. I knelt down and hugged her. "Just for a little while, sweetie," I said. "But I'm always here for you, okay? No matter what." She nodded, but the sadness in her eyes nearly broke me. "Is Mommy mad at you?" she asked. "No," I said softly. "Mommy and I just need some time to figure things out." It felt like the biggest lie I'd ever told, but what else could I say? Emily didn't need to know the details. She didn't need to carry the weight of her parents' mistakes. That night, Melissa called again. This time, her tone was colder, angrier. "I can't believe you went behind my back and talked to my mom," she said. "She called me," I said flatly. "And I told her the truth. Something you should have done a long time ago. You're turning everyone against me," she snapped. "First Dave, now my mom. What's next, the neighbors?" "I don't have to turn anyone against you, Melissa," I said. "You're doing a great job of that on your own." For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She just hung up and I felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe she was finally realizing that this wasn't something she could manipulate her way out of. A week after I left, I sat down with my lawyer to officially start the divorce process. Melissa had been blowing up my phone less, which I took as a small blessing. Maybe she was starting to accept that this was happening. Or maybe she was just regrouping, planning her next move. Either way, I was done playing her games. That afternoon, Melissa sent me a message that caught me off guard. "We need to talk about Emily. Can you come over tonight?" For Emily's sake, I agreed. When I arrived, she was sitting on the couch, looking calmer than I'd seen her in weeks. For a moment, I thought maybe we'd have a productive conversation. Then she opened her mouth. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice carefully measured. "If we're going to co-parent, we need to be on the same page. I want us to go to family counseling." "Counseling?" I repeated. "Melissa, I don't think there's anything left to save here." "It's not for us," she said quickly. "It's for Emily. She needs to see that we're working together, even if we're not together." I stared at her, trying to figure out if she was serious or just using this as another ploy to guilt me into staying. But for once, she actually sounded sincere. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But don't use this as some backdoor way to fix things between us. That ship has sailed." Her face fell, but she nodded. "I get it," she said softly. I don't want her to think this is her fault." "It's not her fault," I said firmly. "It's yours." The words came out harsher than I intended, but I didn't take them back. She needed to hear it. Later, as I was leaving, Emily came running out of her room. "Daddy," she called, throwing her arms around me. "Can you stay for dinner?" My heart clenched. "Not tonight, sweetheart," I said. "But I'll see you soon, okay?" She looked up at me with big, questioning eyes. "Why can't you just stay here with us?" Melissa appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. I crouched down to Emily's level, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sometimes grown-ups need to live in different houses," I said. "But that doesn't mean I love you any less." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she didn't really understand. I hugged her tightly, wishing I could protect her from all of this. As I drove away, I realized that this was the new normal, living apart, trying to shield Emily from the fallout of Melissa's choices. It wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the one I had now. And somehow, I had to make it work. That night, as I lay awake in my friend's guest room, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, relief, and, somewhere deep down, a small glimmer of hope. Hope that, eventually Emily and I would find our way through this. Hope that one day I'd stop feeling like my world was falling apart. But for now, I was just taking it one day at a time.